Missouri has found its 2024 running back. And I've seen a lot of people out there saying the Missouri-Kansas rivalry just doesn't feel the same. And I would agree, but it only needs one thing, and it's quite simple. And I'll tell you what it is on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. And Missouri off to, I would say, a solid start in the transfer portal process. On the football side, of course, Toriano Pride, a cornerback, very much a position of need, I would say, in 2024 for Missouri, as the Tigers are going to be almost certainly without Chris Abrams-Drain and Ennis Rakestraw next season. So that was a good one, but also running back, another obvious position of need with Cody Schrader, who just finished 8th in the Heisman Trophy balloting. Well, he's going to be gone next season, certainly, without a doubt. So with Missouri in need for a running back, well, they found one pretty quickly, and it's Marcus Carroll from Georgia State. And Carroll was a guy who was basically a career backup until his junior season last year in 2022, but really broke out in 2023 with over 1,300 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns, finished 8th nationally in yards per game. He also had over 200 yards receiving as well, and a guy who was definitely in demand when he entered into the portal as well, with Southern Cal, Georgia Tech, and Louisville also in pursuit, and apparently even the Ohio State Buckeyes, Missouri's opponent here coming up in the Cotton Bowl, also kicked the tires a little bit later in the process as well, reportedly. So what I thought was interesting about Carroll, just watching his limited highlights that are out on the internet, is when you watch him run, first of all, you notice the style that Georgia State runs is quite different than what Missouri does. Much more of a downhill style of running, and between the tackles, really just straight through the A gap, almost a modified dive play style of running from Georgia State, as compared to what is mostly a lot of outside zone rushes by Missouri the past few seasons or so. So I do think that while it's obvious that he is going to need to prove that he can play in the outside zone system that Missouri employs, but at the same time, I think Eli Drinkwitz and running backs coach Curtis Looper, who's been with Drinkwitz this whole time here, I think they deserve a lot of benefit of the doubt here when it comes to recruiting, especially a guy who's been in college for this long. I bet he's got the traits that they're looking for in a running back. And in fact, he is about the same size, he being Marcus Carroll. He is about the same size as Cody Schrader, so there is one thing there. It also appears he's pretty good at making the first guy miss, much like Cody Schrader does as well. So also, I think Marcus Carroll showed in his film, in my opinion, an ability to get up to speed rather quickly as well. Against LSU, by the way, I would say the biggest name opponent for Georgia State on the season. As we all remember, probably, LSU, not exactly a banner year defensively for the Bayou Bengals, but at the same time, that's a real opponent, and one where it's not as though Georgia State, trailing in most of that game, was able to just pound the football. And at the same time, against LSU, Marcus Carroll with 15 carries for 87 yards and a long touchdown in that game, along with another 4 catches for 51 yards in the passing game. I also have a good buddy who, for whatever this is worth, is one of the best and closest followers of daily fantasy that I'm aware of out there, of course, over at FanDuel and Prize Picks as well. But according to him, he's a big player of college DFS specifically, and he's a big fan of Marcus Carroll and thinks he's an absolute stud and that this is a great find for Missouri. So that's a plus to me for sure. And once again, since Missouri under Drinkwitz and under, again, running backs Coach Curtis Looper, well, we've done pretty well with running backs. Obviously, Cody Schrader is one of the great diamonds in the rough finds of all time at the position. But obviously, you know what, even though Larry Roundtree and Tyler Beatty were Barry Odom recruits, I think both were obviously quite productive in the outside zone scheme that Missouri likes to run. And also Brandon Jones did a great job of coaching him up on the offensive line this past season too. So with all that said, I think it's obvious that this takes Mizzou out of the Trevor Etienne sweepstakes, the Florida running back who was obviously quite productive against Missouri this past season in the running game and in the passing game as well. There was rumors out there that Missouri was certainly interested. Also, it seems clear that Trevor Etienne's going to want a pretty penny in the name, image, and likeness department, so may have been out of Mizzou's price range. At the same time, I think Marcus Carroll, by all accounts, one of the 3 to 5 best running backs probably currently in the transfer portal market. So I think to lock down a position of need at this point in the process has got to be considered a win for Eli Drinkwitz and company. And since I brought up the Cotton Bowl earlier, let's go check out the line. And yes, Missouri seems to be hanging in there as 2.5-point favorites over at FanDuel Sportsbook. I wouldn't expect a whole lot of line movement over the next week or so. Once we get to the last week, game week of the Cotton Bowl, we'll see some actual injury reports, guys ruled out, all that good stuff. So then we'll see some movement. I just wouldn't expect a whole lot to change here unless there is a surprise mover in the transfer portal on either side. That certainly is a possibility, as we know, in 2023. But speaking of 2024, well, the 2023 champions will be crowned in 2024. And again, over at FanDuel Sportsbook, you've got Michigan, Alabama, and Texas as basically co-favorites for all intents and purposes. Michigan, a slight favorite at plus 200, so 2-1. Alabama, slightly higher than that, plus 220. Texas, plus 250. It's Washington who is the actual long shot here at plus 650. And that did stand out a little bit to me, the Huskies, but I do have to say, I think actually Michigan is the value here because, in my opinion, the Wolverines are a better unit than Alabama and Texas. So you're actually getting a little bit of value here on Michigan at plus 200. So you lay down $10, you win $20. Those are your odds there. And also, let's face it, the football gods seem to be against the casual fan these days. And what would anger the casual non-Michigan fan the most this season? Well, obviously, the sign-stealing Wolverines taking down the national title. Yeah, I think that'll do it. So you know what? Give me Michigan at plus 200 to win the whole thing. And coming up, after a decent performance in Lawrence by the Mizzou basketball team, I've noticed some people remarking that, the rivalry just does not feel the same anymore. And in some ways, that's hard to argue, but I just think there's one critical element of this rivalry that's been missing. And if we get it, I think it'll come back in a big way. That's just my opinion. I'll explain exactly what I mean coming up. But first, let's tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. And for your second listen, be sure to check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Again, that's Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. Go subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. That's Locked On Sports Today. And for a lot of people out there, including Gabe DeArmond this morning over at PowerMizzou.com during his 10 thoughts, he was saying, you know what, the rivalry just is not the same as it used to be. And of course, I'm talking about the border war between Missouri and Kansas, specifically on the basketball court. Well, part of the problem here is it is just the basketball court now, number one. There isn't the football rivalry, the annual football game, and by the way, the return game as well. You see, last season you had Missouri students early in the season not camping out, but being sure to get their way into some early games against Southern Indiana or whoever to make sure that they got credit so they could be at that Kansas game. Well, that was a heck of an incentive to have for Missouri students and Missouri season ticket holders in general to get season tickets, to show up for these games, to have that home Kansas game every season dangling as this nice reward almost, a great crowd, and just a highly hyper-competitive basketball game annually every season. Well, obviously that is gone, and what's also gone is the stakes in the conference standings. And apparently that's never coming back unless Kansas eventually joins the Southeastern Conference. I wouldn't put a lot of money on that at this point. And frankly, my post-game numbers are tough to argue with too. I did an entire show on Sunday about the Kansas game, and obviously it would have been better if Missouri won, but still, the fact that my numbers, I'm going to be honest, kind of did a huge nosedive not talking any about football. Well, that saddened me a little bit. Quite honestly, do I have to just talk about football for the next 9 months of my life? I got to be honest, I'm not so sure I'm interested in doing that. What I've done on this program forever is talk heavily about football during football season and heavily about basketball during basketball season. Obviously, the transfer portal market changes things considerably. But you know what? When it comes to the Missouri and Kansas basketball rivalry, quite simply what's been missing from this rivalry is the one important element. Missouri hasn't won yet, okay? Missouri has gotten their asses whipped. Let's be honest. Pardon my French there, but let's be honest. They got they're just stomped the previous two seasons in Lawrence and in Columbia. And as somebody who was at the game in Columbia last season, I'll promise you there's never been a better atmosphere in Mizzou Arena than what you found for the first few minutes of that ball game. But unfortunately, Kansas runs out to a huge lead and never relinquishes it. And obviously, with those two games and then this past game in Lawrence, now a 3-game losing streak to start off here for Missouri, now it feels like more of a feud than it does an actual rivalry. You don't really get an actual rivalry until the other team wins, and Missouri hasn't won a game against Kansas since 2012. That's just obviously there's a lot of circumstances to that where Missouri and Kansas didn't play for all those years, but that's just a fact. Unless you're my age or a little bit younger, you probably don't even really have that many memories of Missouri and Kansas at this point. So what's really needed here to make this rivalry truly competitive and heated and meaningful both ways as it used to be is for Missouri to actually win a ball game. So I think it's really important here next season at Mizzou Arena and the next couple seasons in Kansas City, Missouri's got to win at least one of those ball games, if not two, right, to really get the juices flowing in this rivalry. But my goodness, Tigers absolutely need to win one of those ball games here the next 3 seasons. And speaking of the future on the basketball court, well, Aaron Rowe, who is a local product, plays at Tolton High School here in Columbia. It was a transfer from Link Academy in Branson as well. But Rowe is a really, really talented player, a top 25 type guy, a borderline McDonald's All-American type prospect. He might well make the McDonald's All-American team this year. We shall see. But Rowe, an excellent prospect, down to Missouri, Tennessee, and Kansas State reportedly, so perhaps Missouri can win yet another Super Bowl against Kansas State and Tennessee tomorrow, this time, though, on the basketball recruiting floor. That would certainly be enjoyable, would it not? And it seems like Missouri has a great chance with Rowe by all indications. I'm not going to go out on a limb and predict anything at this point. I don't have any type of inside information there whatsoever. But you have to say, if Rowe, who would be a member of the 2025 class, what an awesome start to that class that would be for Missouri after Dennis Gates has already put together what looks like an excellent 2024 class on paper. And with guys like Trevor Etienne, big name running backs, like Etienne from the University of Florida, just freely on the market now to transfer and seek huge paydays through name, image, and likeness rules, well, that's caused a lot of fans out there to predictably call for regulation in the transfer portal, in the NIL markets. Well, what do I think actually is the best solution to all of this, if there indeed is a problem? Let's talk about the portal and NIL once again coming up. But you know what? First, let's talk about Prize Picks, where, frankly, it's the easiest place in North America to play daily fantasy sports. It's also the most exciting as well. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of fighting it out with thousands of other players, you just pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll on in. For instance, you can take Steph Curry for more than 29 points and Nikola Jokic for more than 10 rebounds. If they both hit, you're good to go. But Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries can stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball, if you have a player who exits in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only DFS platform with an injury insurance policy. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. By the way, for those of you watching on YouTube, you might notice on today's show graphic made a bit of a boo-boo. It says the MUKU needs one thing. Well, it needs a noun, perhaps. How about the MUKU rivalry needs one thing? Come on, John. How about proofreading your own graphic next time? That would have definitely improved the show just slightly today. But you know what? When it comes to the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness, I think sometimes people are so rocked by the change in this sport that they make a common mistake that a lot of people make which is they just want the people in charge to take action. And quite literally, we see this with Congress all the time, in my humble opinion. And quite literally, there are people that are calling on Congress to take action here and saying that this is never going to get better until Congress gets involved. Well, what does that say about the NCAA if they are so powerless that they are, or just stupid, impotent, whatever you want to call the NCAA, that they're unable to control their own sports at this point, or to make a set of rules that is actually going to be good for the future of the sport? If indeed it's that bad and we're relying on people in Congress to come in and save us, then we might as well just be done with the NCAA at this point. And frankly, in my humble opinion, when I see a lot of different ideas out there for different regulations, the only one that seems mostly reasonable to me is I could see, all right, maybe a second, the second transfer. Maybe there are some slight barriers to entry that you have to meet there. Like maybe on a second transfer, you actually might have to sit out a year or a semester unless there's a new coach that leaves, something like that. But again, the problem is now you're getting into a whole other problem, which is now you're giving a centralized authority power, over waivers. And as we've seen over time, all waivers is going to be as a de facto gift, a de facto loophole in the rule that makes it no longer a rule, where 90% of people end up getting the waiver. Is it really a rule? So what have you actually solved at that point? In my opinion, the most fair solution is actual contracts and fair and open negotiation between players and the actual schools. And that's just something that's not happening right now. Right now, you do have, I suppose, you have certainly negotiations and maybe some type of written agreements or contracts between players and third parties like fans and boosters and car dealerships and Emo's Pizza and whoever it might be, all these different entities that aren't actually the school itself or the athletic programs themselves. To me, until we get to that point, until we get to the point where schools are able to actually directly negotiate with the players themselves and say, hey, we'll offer you X, Y, and Z to come to Missouri, but you have to sign a contract for 2 years or 4 years, or maybe it's only 1 year. Maybe there isn't a contract for certain people. Again, this is all going to be played out, to me, in the process of a fair and open contract and type of negotiation. Anything else is, to me, other people just imposing their own wills and philosophies on the rest of the college football landscape. Because what I'm trying to say is, who can really say what the proper length of time is for somebody to have to sit out in the transfer market, or to how many times should you be allowed to transfer? Is there a right number there? I don't think that there is, because look at Sean East. On the broadcast in the Kansas game, they were making a big deal about how many different schools he's attended. Well, as a Missouri fan, do we think he should be punished for that? Do we hate Sean East or think he's a bad person because of this? I certainly don't. So I don't know. To me, I think I've definitely evolved my thinking over time with the transfer portal, just because it has been such a radical change in such a short period of time. I can understand why people get concerned and want to push back. I really do. I just would caution people that the proposed overarching regulations that you want to impose on basically the entire sport, it may have some real negative consequences that you aren't intending. And honestly, I just think no single athlete, no single person situation is the same. So I think to impose a one-size-fits-all on everybody just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Ultimately, even though we've seen significant players at Missouri transfer out, it certainly hasn't ruined the sport for Missouri fans. Interest is at a real high right now in football, certainly, and basketball as well. So I don't know. I think some of some of our worries, including my own worries, have probably been overblown here a little bit. I just think, the calls for, well, you got to do something. I just don't, I think something is often actually worse than nothing. It truly can be in these types of cases. Let's think through exactly what types of regulations and rules we do want to implement. Ultimately, I don't think we're going to really have a fair solution, though, until these schools and these athletic departments that are raking in billions and billions of dollars in television money, until the players are able to directly negotiate with them, I just don't think we're ever going to get anywhere productive. But that's just me. But hey, thank you all for joining me today on Locked On Mizzou. Hopefully this has been a productive use of your time today. And if you think it has been, please tell a fellow true son or daughter about this program. Tell them we are free and available wherever you get podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the whole deal. So until next time, you know what? Next time we're going to talk probably Aaron Rowe. Hopefully he'll be a Missouri commitment, but we'll talk about it one way or the other next time right here on Locked On Mizzou.